Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Fuhrman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, Super Bowl Spectacular. Call it what you will. As always, Bet the Board podcast, part of the Wondery Podcast Network. We've bided our time. We've gone through the preseason. We've gone through the postseason. We'll have two teams vying for the Lombardi Trophy this coming Sunday from Glendale, Arizona. I am your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined, as always, by my esteemed colleague and co-host, who I know is always angry and disgruntled that this is the final pro football show of the 2022-2023 season.
Angry and disgruntled? I'm not sure. Obviously, I love NFL, but it's been a grind, man. Long season.
I feel every year we get older, and we're not exactly old by any stretch of the imagination. These seasons seem to go on longer and longer. So I can only begin to imagine how the players feel when they put their bodies through the absolute meat grinder that is the rigors of the NFL season, if we feel exhausted by the time we get to Super Bowl Sunday.
Well, they're actually in shape. That's the difference.
Hey, I know about this workout regimen you've been putting together, multivitamins. It's akin to the TB12 diet, except from what I've been told, there are a few more carbs in your day-to-day than what Tom Brady used to put in his system during his playing career.
Yeah, I mean, it happens every year, right? You get in shape in the off season, and then all of a sudden you're able to only work out a couple days in season, and then it turns into no days, and then the holidays come. And the positive is the starting point after football season is in a better spot than it was a year ago.
So that's good then. You have to go glass half full on this kind of stuff.
Yes, exactly.
That's
all right, let's get to the brass tacks. Let's talk about this game. We're going to be here forever.
You want to talk football, huh? You can follow Payne on Twitter, at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You, of course, can follow me there. And we do have plenty of ground to cover on this game. So many fascinating matchups when you look at the composition of both of these rosters. Two teams going about business in very different fashions, but arriving, or at least hoping to, arrive at the same end result. Before we get into some of the X's and O's, Payne, and we'll break down both sides of the ball, both the passing game and running game for the Chiefs against the Eagles defense and vice versa, let's discuss the number. I know it's been picked apart over the course of the 10 days that it's been on the betting board since we knew it was going to be Chiefs-Eagles playing for the Lombardi Trophy. Here we are now with Philadelphia painted a 1.5-point favorite, but at some very prominent shops whose opinions we respect as far as opening numbers are concerned, we saw the Chiefs open up as slight favorites for this game.
Your head's in a little bit of a pretzel with this game. Is that correct? That's my vibe.
That is putting it mildly, as I've gone through props, gone through matchups, trying to figure out exactly who I think is going to win from a side and total standpoint. I'd be lying if I sat here, spoiler alert, 2.5 minutes into the podcast and told you I felt that I was 100% confident in exactly how this game was going to play out. Fortunately, that's why I have you here to walk me through the woods and put me in a better place about 90 minutes from now.
Well, before we kind of talk about the line, I think that your mindset's that way, and there is some variance with this because the two teams here are just constructed so much differently, right? I mean, this is how you make the Super Bowl. You either have an elite quarterback or you have a rookie quarterback or a young quarterback, rather, on his rookie deal where you can just load the rest of the roster. And I think the argument here is pretty simple in that Philly has the more complete roster. You probably should when you're paying your quarterback $6 million over 4 years. But every team is dying for an elite level franchise quarterback, and you have the best player on the field with Kansas City. And I think because of that, the guys that like the Chiefs understand that the most important position is the quarterback, and the best quarterbacks many times can beat better rosters top to bottom. So I think that's ultimately why we've had some two-way action on this game. Kind of going to the line, the initial money was on Philadelphia when the Chiefs opened 2.5-point favorites, and I think that's pretty understandable. And you think about when the market opens, it's moments after the Bengals-Chiefs game concludes, right? You're not deep diving the matchup at that point. There's nothing to read informationally at that point. You can't really ascertain anything from player or coaching pressers. But you just watch Mahomes and Kelsey appear less than 100%, and Tony goes down with a non-contact lower body injury. Juju's chronic knee flares up. Mecole leaves with the same injury that caused him to miss the last 2 months, and then Snead and Willie Gay go down defensively. You have Mahomes literally throwing to Marcus Kemp down the stretch, right? So your goal...
Not Sean Kemp, by the way, for Seattle Supersonic fans that are out there, although that'd be mildly entertaining.
Yeah, the Sean Kemp version of Seattle might be the only version of Sean Kemp that could get down the field.
He'd be a good offensive lineman.
Balls.
He'd be a nice swing tackle at his current size and weight.
So, the point and process and mindset is to initially number grab the Eagles plus 2.5 or 1.5, because regardless of the winner of this game, right, it's highly unlikely we'll see Eagles plus 2.5 again. But once some influential bettors had time to digest the new market price and fully evaluate what actually unfolded in the championship games on that Sunday, you start to view it a little bit differently, right? Like, you quickly realize the Chiefs probably aren't 100%, but they're a little bit closer, and 100% Chiefs team probably is a 1.5 point favorite here. And so the line can't be Chiefs plus 2.5, Chiefs plus 3 minus 20 on the bye, Chiefs plus 3 minus 15 at Jazz. And heck, if you have some runners stationed everywhere, or you're based out of Colorado, Chiefs 3 flat was available at a couple casinos there, specifically Wildwood. So now past the price grabs of like Eagles plus 2.5 or Chiefs plus 2.5 and better, guys started to deep dive the game over the last week, right? You get more information. You start digging into some of the nooks and crannies, and you go back and rewatch both championship games. And once your emotions have cooled, you quickly realize two things. And it's the Eagles didn't beat San Francisco by 24. It was more like an 11-point game in the advanced box score, and that was with a fourth-string quarterback, with a third-string quarterback that couldn't throw more than 2 yards down the field. In the early game script for Philly with lots of passing, Jalen Hurts couldn't really execute that. And at the 2-minute warning of the first half, despite a touchdown that wasn't from Philly, and again, a fourth-string quarterback and Josh Johnson under center for the 49ers, the game's tied. And then, the late game, once you remove the hate fatigue for a team that's been to 5 straight AFC title games, once you remove the Patrick Mahomes hate because he's the best and his wife and brother are annoying, which they are, and actually watch that game, right? It's not nearly as close as the scoreboard indicates. I mean, Kadarius Toney drops a touchdown. Pacheco's touchdown gets called back for a hold. Could have easily been 14-0. At halftime, the Chiefs' win expectancy was through the roof. The Bengals even get all of the momentum things, right? You get the momentum score before halftime. You get the momentum stop out of halftime. You get the follow-up touchdown drive, and we're all thinking, here we go again, right? It's another Bengals-Chiefs game where the Chiefs are winning on the field but not on the scoreboard, and it just feels like they can't get past this mental hurdle. And all of a sudden, it's like, nope, Kansas City regains the lead by 7. They're getting the ball back. Sky Moore returns a punt to the Bengals 34. It's going to be a 2-score game again. Gets called back for a hold. No worries, right? The Chiefs are in plus territory again after a big gain, about to make it a 2-score lead for the second time on the same drive. Nope, taunting penalty. And that completely changes the play calling, and you see the unforced error a couple plays later when Mahomes fumbles because Pacheco nudges him in the back at release. That fumble generated 6 negative expected points for Kansas City. Nothing the Bengals did, just kind of a fluke. And so, if you're still kind of in the Stone Age and you look at counting stats, the Chiefs out first down, outgained, had more time of possession despite having one less drive than the Bengals. In terms of net EPA per play on non-turnover plays, right? The Chiefs were a positive 0.07 EPA per play. When Burrow and Mahomes both dropped back to pass, despite a decimated receiving core and facing the more difficult defense metrically, Mahomes was a net positive 8% in passing success rate. So the scoreboards in both title games weren't really reflective of what actually transpired on the field. And so that's really the timeline and the reasoning for the ping pong line movement to this point, Todd. And it's not just two different factions taking the Eagles +2 and +1.5, and then the Chiefs +3 and +2.5. Many of the same bettors that we respect, that we associate with, have both sides in their pocket.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, it's not just different groups deciding they have very different mindsets on all of that. It's a lot of the same individuals who got out ahead of it, figured out what to do with that number later, and if it's coming back over the top, as we know in this business, you take plus 2.5 both ways in a football game. It's hard to go broke, and if the game falls 1 or 2, you're sitting in the catbird seat able to cash tickets on both sides should the game be close down the stretch. So you set the table for exactly how we arrived at the market consensus, essentially where we are now. We'll call it, 96 hours? I'm bad with math. Leading up to Sunday's kickoff, and we look to set the table for the game this coming weekend. I mean, there have only been 7 Super Bowls with a spread of 2.5 or shorter, 8th matchup of the number 1 seeds going back to 1990. So clearly we have 2 of the best teams in football doing battle here. Philadelphia exerted their dominance starting as early as week 1. And we've seen Kansas City continue to figure out their identity as the season progressed with life without Tyreek Hill. But the Chiefs are currently listed as a playoff underdog for the first time since 2015. AFC Championship was the 15th straight playoff game the franchise played as a favorite, the longest streak by any team since the 1970 merger. And when you look at Patrick Mahomes, he's never been a playoff underdog in 13 career postseason starts. In his career as an underdog, 7-1-1 ATS, 6-3 straight up. If we want to set the table for the total, we saw overs be the order of the day wild card weekend going 5-1. The last 6 playoff games we've seen 6-0 to the under. And you look at the Super Bowl trend, the past 4 Super Bowls have all gone under the total as well. The last time 5 straight Super Bowls went under, 1968 to 1974. We look at these 2 teams from an offensive standpoint, basically leading the league in a lot of the key metrics that are there from a points per game standpoint. It's the 7th Super Bowl matchup between top scoring offenses in each conference. Both teams scored exactly 546 points in the regular season and playoffs combined. And it's the 2nd Super Bowl matchup between a team leading the league in passing touchdowns and a team leading the league in rushing touchdowns. Payne, we always uncover every single matchup, especially for a game like this where you have 2 full weeks to dive into all the data, all the minutia, and everything else. I feel like the most logical place to start is with the Kansas City offense against the Philadelphia defense, because the one question for anybody that appears to be a slight detractor of Philadelphia and what they've accomplished is strength of schedule. This very realistically has a chance to be a jolt to their system, given the Patrick Mahomes matchup and the way Andy Reid and Eric Bieniemy will look to attack. So from a Kansas City passing standpoint, do the Chiefs have a path to success against what's been a very good Eagles secondary, but obviously from a strength of schedule standpoint, leaves a lot to be desired?
You mentioned one guy in that equation. Were you trying to help him get another job interview?
I just can't hear, all the articles that come out every year when he can't get a head coaching job. Somebody just give him a job so I don't have to hear about it every coaching carousel season.
We were all hoping he would, so Kafka would go from QB coach to offensive coordinator. Anyways, you never want your opponent to have bulletin board material, especially when it doesn't come from your own locker room. But Brandon Ayuk wasn't wrong in his assessment of the Eagles' defense. And I think the savviest football minds, both X's and O's and bettors, agree with Ayuk. I mean, I started betting on a professional level in 2004. By our strength of schedule metrics, and I'd put ours against anybody's, there isn't a team that's made the Super Bowl having the easiest regular season and postseason schedule until this Eagles team. And the reason why that is, you kind of hinted at it, the Eagles defense has faced the very easiest schedule of offenses. And the 3 times Philly stepped up in class against a top 10 schedule-adjusted offense with its starting quarterback, the Eagles surrendered 32 points on average, and one of the data points is a monsoon game against Jacksonville. If you exclude turnovers, the Lions, Jags, and Cowboys all finished the week top 10 in EPA per play against the Eagles defense. Now, you get the number 1 offense with the number 1 quarterback, with Andy Reid having 2 weeks to prepare in a controlled indoor environment, something Kansas City hasn't played in recently, right? It's been freezing cold Arrowhead temps with some wins. And you look into the actual matchup when Kansas City and Mahomes are going to drop back to pass here, there's advantages. I mean, the Eagles like to live in zone more than 70+% of the time. I know Philly's kind of kicked up their man rate just a touch towards the end of the season, but it's nothing like massive when it actually matters. The Eagles mostly use cover 3 within their zone concept. Mahomes has torched that coverage. And the Chiefs are number 1 in the NFL in EPA against zone on all downs. They're number 2 against too high shell. So they solved that, right? Teams kind of threw that curveball at them 18 months ago, and they weren't quite sure how to combat it. It's not a thing anymore. And within that, I think we've talked multiple times how the Eagles' pass defense has been vulnerable to short throws. And despite a very poor schedule of offenses faced, the Eagles on passes thrown 1 to 9 air yards, they're 17th in EPA per pass attempt, 24th in first down rate on early downs, 26th in third down conversion rate on these short passes. Mahomes might not be 100%, right? Is he 88%? Is he 84%? Is he 92.5%? I don't know. But I think if you're worrying about the Eagles getting pressure, or he's not 100%, or you look at how the Eagles defense is situated, the best way to combat that is with quick short passes. And the Chiefs have really started to do that, and that's why they've been able to combat some of the too high shell, combat some of the zone looks, because they have the 9th highest rate of throws, 1 to 9 air yards. The Chiefs receiver group is a little murky in terms of how healthy guys are. It's why some of their receiving props opened a touch later. But once they did, you saw all the guys that would be a real factor in that area of the field get steamed over a little bit. There was some love for Kadarius Toney, over 20.5 receiving yards. Some love for Juju, over 33.5. Love for Pacheco, over 12.5, and even some Kelsey love, over 6.5 receptions, because of his spidey ability to kill zone defenses. What I would kind of caution at this point is, we're kind of in no man's land for betting overs on player yardages. You kind of want to bet overs early with Super Bowl props and generally unders late. Get out ahead, let the public, take over literally and figuratively. And then before kickoff, you'll see pros find some value in unders, especially if it meshes with their idea of the game script and state. This particular game, as we kind of talked about, is a little wonky. Now, there's been this theory out there that Jonathan Gannon might play more man coverage. And this is something I talked to my guys about, and we researched a little bit. And maybe he tries to throw a curveball with multiple weeks to prepare. But most of the man coverage that the Eagles have used isn't really the kind that gives Mahomes trouble. And if you look at man coverage rates, the Eagles have used 37% in a game. That was the most. And it was against Washington in Week 10. And the Eagles were torched as a double-digit favorite and lost outright. On the season, the Eagles are in zone 70% of the time. You look, even against Andy Dalton and the Saints, the Eagles went 35% man, their second highest rate of that usage this season, lost again, right? The 2 highest rates of man coverage by games the Eagles lost against Taylor Heineke and Andy Dalton. I mean, you go back the last 2 seasons, the 6th highest rates of man coverage games Jonathan Gannon elected to play, Eagles lost 5 of them. And you can kind of see why. If you look at early downs, first 3 quarters, the Eagles are 17th in EPA per pass allowed in man coverage, number 1 in zone. So they're effectively playing like they're going to their secondary pitch that's not very good. It's like going to the breaking ball and it just doesn't break enough. Now, I think the way Philly's defense competes in this spot and keeps the Chiefs below expectation would be with pressure, right? Philly's number 2 in pressure rate. They do a good job turning pressures into sacks. 3 guys along the Eagles' defensive front ranked top 9 in sacks created. I've kind of gone on my soapbox about Orlando Brown many times. He's a massive liability as a pass blocker. Brett Veach lucked out with Brown turning down his offer this past offseason. The sample is small, but Mahomes has been pressured at a 9% higher rate in the playoffs than his regular season rate this year. Josh Sweat has an uber quick get-off. That's exactly what gives Orlando Brown trouble. Hassan Reddick is going to be matched up with Wiley on the other side. The way Kansas City combats this, right, is having Mahomes continue to be, the magic man. He's number 1 in the NFL in percentage of pressures that turn into sacks. Just 10% of the time does a pressure turn into Mahomes actually going down. Does a great job evading pressure, making that pressure pay. But it's very similar, the game plan, I think, here to what the Chiefs did against the 49ers back in Week 7. It's screens. It's jet sweeps. Likely Kadarius Toney and Sky Moore in that Mecole Hardman role to keep the Eagles' ends honest. Condensed formations. Right now you have Watson, who's going to be back from his illness. I think the Chiefs are going to use more 12 and 13 personnel. And when the Chiefs use 13, that's been the most efficient personnel grouping of any offense in the NFL this season, there's a belief that with scheme, right, and Mahomes' talent, that the Chiefs will be able to protect better, relatively well, better than expectation. That's why if you followed the prop market, pro bettors whacked under 6.5 total sacks for the game, and we're now down to like 5.5 juiced here, Todd.
Yeah, I was going to say, you mentioned the sack prop, and we've also seen some money coming on individual players. A lot of the headliners for the Philadelphia Eagles and some pretty advantageous, plus prices that are out there, the Hassan Reddicks of the world and some of the other players that are there. You give the Chiefs 2 weeks to figure out exactly what Mahomes can and can't do, and there's obviously very few things that fall into the latter category other than if he's limited by injury, and there'll be opportunities for Kansas City to spread the ball around to some of the receivers that you mentioned, get the playmakers the ball in space, and allow them to kind of operate after the catch, most likely looking to avoid some of the talented outside corners that you have in James Bradbury and, of course, Darius Slay. Travis Kelce, you mentioned briefly and talked a little bit about his prop number. We've seen that one get bet up, both yards and catches. Philadelphia, at least metrically speaking, appears to be decent against tight ends. Do you feel it's still regardless? Hey, it's Travis Kelce. I mean, this guy is going to feast regardless of what kind of defensive game plan you throw against a player that talented.
I mean, it just depends, right? I'm not clamoring to go over on Kelce, but this is the type of game where you're getting your horses involved, and it's very much determined upon what Jonathan Gannon does defensively. He has not typically been a guy who likes to jam at the line of scrimmage. Are you going to give Kelce a free release? Are you going to play zone? If you play zone, as I alluded to, the one thing Kelce has, now he's like super talented, but he has a real understanding for just how to get open, how to sit down in these zone windows. And that's partly why, the success that we have seen from Mahomes, from this Chiefs offense going against zone defenses, they've had a real nice time. And so what is Jonathan Gannon going to do here? Is he going to zone everyone else and play man on Kelce? Is this going to be like a basketball box and one type situation where, if you're potentially smart, you're hoping your defensive end can just give Kelce a little nudge at the line of scrimmage, then you walk him into zone, or you walk him into man rather, and then the rest of the defense is playing zone. I don't know what he's going to elect to do. I think the interesting conversation here before we kind of get to the run game is, there's been this discussion that I knew was going to happen. I think if you've listened to other shows or other podcasts, and I'll be candid, like Monday after the championship games, we were sitting around kind of joking. We're like, what is the one thing that people talking about this game are going to try to sound extremely smart? And what is their talking point? And it's going to be how Jonathan Gannon came up with a game plan that gave Patrick Mahomes trouble when he was with the Indianapolis Colts. And you kind of go back to this theory. And, the first iteration, which was a playoff game, Patrick Mahomes absolutely torched Jonathan Gannon's defense. It was a game in Arrowhead. The following year was back in Arrowhead. The Colts won outright. But you think about that game, and the Chiefs were down their top two wide receivers with Tyreek Hill. And they were down their left tackle. And Patrick Mahomes re-injured his ankle in that 2019 game. And so, they were able to play keep away. Then you look at some of the matchups, with Jonathan Gannon in Philadelphia. Patty Mahomes torched him there. I just think this is really interesting. You see the guys from the Eagles staff that are taking some interviews, right? Shane Steichen interviewing for the Colts head coaching job. Quarterbacks coach for the Eagles, potentially in talks with Notre Dame about becoming their offensive coordinator. No one's talking to Jonathan Gannon. And, there was a spot last year where people were thinking about firing him after that Raiders game we've referenced multiple times, where Derek Carr just picked them apart with a bunch of short passes, and it didn't seem like Jonathan Gannon could adapt. And now all of a sudden he's got a good defense because Howie was able to spend $1 gazillion on parts because he's not paying the quarterback anything, and he's faced the easiest schedule of offense. It's like, oh, Jonathan Gannon's brilliant all of a sudden. I don't think that's the case, and I think that's why we've seen some buyback on the Chiefs at the plus number of 2.5 and 3. It's why we've started to see some over money enter this market after the initial grab under. I don't really know how how Jonathan Gannon's going to come up with his game plan here, right? Like, you're going to throw a curveball here. I just don't know what it is.
Yep. No,
You know, I think it's tough to navigate this a little bit, but, you know, this has to be a Kelsey game. Am I in love with going over the best weapon in the biggest game, right? It's not by nature my vibe.
I was going to say,
I know what you're trying to get out of me.
You might get your professional gambler card
Right.
revoked if you go over catches and over
Now,
yards with Travis Kelce. Although I will say, at
listen,
the Open, it's different than going over
yes.
at this point now.
Yeah. Like if you're waiting until Sunday morning and it's 7.5 and you're going over, sure, you might win. Just jump off a cliff if you're doing that, right? Like, it's just, you're not going to win long term getting the worst of it on like one of the squarest potential props that you'll have, right? Taking a team's best weapon and going over in the biggest game on planet Earth like an hour before kickoff.
Yeah, it's a little more
typically not the the formula for success. What was I going to say? You kind of threw me off there, but yeah, let's kind of wrap the pass game up here and transition to, you know, a smaller portion of the Chiefs offense.
No, we can definitely go there right now. And you mentioned the Chiefs' smaller portion. That, of course, is their run game, where the over-under, depending on where you look, for total rushing yards from the Chiefs as a collective is set under 100 for this particular game. We saw Isaiah Pacheco kind of assert himself as RB1 over the latter half of the schedule. It was obviously bottled up on the ground versus the Bengals, thankfully for us, 10 carries, 26 yards, but was able to contribute in a different manner with 59 receiving yards. And when you look at Pacheco, he's run for 30 or more in 10 of 11 games, 58 or more in 9 of 11, and clearly his ascent to RB1 has been pronounced. But the Chiefs do have other weapons. Clyde Edwards-Helaire comes off injured reserve. I don't expect him to play a big role. We'll see if he's even out there or gets his touches. But Jerick McKinnon, you look at how he has taken on a reduced role, both as a runner and receiver, couldn't really do a whole heck of a lot against the Bengals. When you try and figure out Kansas City and their ability, willingness, or desire to run the football, is this just about keeping Philadelphia off balance and keeping them honest? Or do you feel there's a path to success for Kansas City to create true offensive balance, especially if the pass is setting up the run?
Of all the matchups in this game, the delta between respected minds varies the most when it comes to the Chiefs' ability to run the ball. And, you know, our listeners cashed this bet in the AFC Championship game, and there's a respected group that didn't wait long and hit Pacheco under 52.5 rushing yards again for the Super Bowl. It's why we're down as low as 46.5 as we record this. Some of that matchup, some of that with Helaire being upgraded and likely stealing a series or two, right? We've seen total rushing yards under 103.5 for the Chiefs get hit as well, and that's why we're down to about 100.5 and even some 99.5. Now, there's a real chance the area where the Chiefs have success running is in the red zone. The Eagles are 29th in rushing success rate allowed in the red zone, and the way the Chiefs operate in the red zone with heavy sets and multiple tight ends is what has hurt the Eagles' defense this season. And they haven't faced many good tight end groups like the Chiefs. So there's a chance that, well, you can't really compile a ton of rushing yards just being effective in the red zone. There are some areas where, you know, the Chiefs will have some advantage specifically there. Now, there's a chance, right, that Kansas City might break one of those wide receiver jet sweeps that we've talked about, whether, you know, they're using standard motion ahead of their run play, or, you know, you have this receiver motioning from the slot, and I think that could potentially, you might see an explosive there. But I think where the discrepancy actually lies is the way Kansas City primarily runs is from 3 wide sets, right? With 2 weeks, who knows, right? That could change. We could see loads of heavier formations, which would probably be wise. But generally speaking, the Chiefs run from 3 wide sets. And we know the Eagles' defense, which you called out, you know, a couple weeks ago, has certainly improved as the season's moved on against the run. But if you look at early downs, the first 3 quarters on all runs not in the red zone, the Eagles have actually been fantastic stopping runs they see from 3 wide receiver sets, because it's kind of what they see in practice all day, right? They live in 3 wide themselves. They like to run the ball. The Eagles' defense against those types of runs, 8th best, and it gets even better stopping zone running plays from 3 wide sets, 6th best, which is traditionally the majority of the Chiefs' runs. And so, you know, this has been this delta of opinions on how well or how effective the Chiefs' run game can be. I would fully expect a healthier Mahomes, again, receivers will be in the run game mix. I personally haven't done anything yet regarding running backs for the Chiefs. I know we felt this was worth addressing quickly, but the Chiefs are the most pass-heavy offense relative to expectation. This is very much a Patrick Mahomes game. Most teams will thank Andy Reid if you take the ball into Mahomes' hands and be like, hey, let's hand this off to a 7th-round rookie for 4 yards. But it was worth discussing because I thought it was interesting just based upon some really sharp guys that I respect, whether they're bettors, prop guys, matchups, X's and O's guys. Everyone was just varying in their opinion of how effective the Chiefs' run game could be.
Well, I think the other thing, too, that's always interesting, when you look at game script, and we talk about it all the time, when you try and figure out player props and how games are going to go, you're going to gravitate towards passing totals over for a team that's most likely playing from behind because they're going to have to abandon what they would normally do from a tendency standpoint in a positive game script. Kansas City, it kind of breaks that mold. And I know we get critical of teams that can't run the ball in their 4-minute offense, but Patrick Mahomes is the great equalizer. So even if Kansas City has a 7 or 10 point lead with, say, 10 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, it's not like Andy Reid is going to go, you know what, Patrick, we're taking the ball out of your hand. We're going to run the ball on 75% of our plays to bleed the clock down. So it doesn't create some of those opportunities or avenues that you normally would find. If you believe Team A is going to play from the lead, you're going to gravitate towards a lot of their running backs going over on yards, over on carries, because there'll be situations late in the game where you're going to get some of those garbage time touches.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree there. I think, again, the game plan is going to be interesting here because I think the mindset is we're not taking it out of Mahomes' hands. We're getting the ball out quick. We're throwing it short. But you start to look at really how ineffective this Eagles defense has been defending heavy sets. And you're like, boy, maybe there is a path here where they're going to have some success, not just throwing from the heavy sets, but being able to mix in some of the ground game. And it would be, the least shocking thing if Andy Reid, of all guys, right, just has 2 weeks and he finds a weakness and he's able to devise a couple zone runs that effectively take advantage of a certain weak spot on your defense. Like, that wouldn't be all that surprising, but I think it very much depends on what formations we see the Chiefs using. Hey, maybe they're hands forced. Maybe halfway through the first quarter, we see Juju's knees acting up and Kadarius Toney's ankle isn't 100% healthy, and it forces the Chiefs to use these heavier sets now that Watson's back from his illness. And maybe that's what starts to have more usage for the running backs and enhances this ground game for Kansas City. There's just some variance within that, and it's just why I've kind of decided to stay away from the whole Chiefs ground game thing, aside from one prop, which we might talk about a little bit later.
Yeah, it's always a secondary pitch, and who can make those adjustments. Kansas City does it better than anybody out there. One market that has been interesting to watch is the over-under on Chiefs ball carriers for the game. Open 4.5 at modest juice. That thing has gotten steamed to high heaven. Over 4.5 speaks to the level of creativity and the number of players. You referenced the jet sweeps we could see for Andy Reid getting the ball in the hands of some of his difference makers in unique situations. You can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, as always, for all things Bet the Board, follow the Bet the Board podcast at Bet the Board. And when we look at the other side of the ball, Payne, Philadelphia, 4th appearance in the Super Bowl in franchise history, the 2nd since 2004. We know Nick Sirianni's background was the Chiefs' offensive assistant from 2009 to 2012, was not retained by Andy Reid when Reid became the head coach in 2013. That's a storyline that's been interesting to follow, some of the comments and quotes around all of that. When you look at Philadelphia, it became the first team since the 2010 Chargers to finish top 3 in total offense and defense in the regular season. Offensively, plus 137 point differential in the second quarter this season. Second best in any quarter by any team in any season since 2000. Only the 2019 Kansas City Chiefs that were plus 138 in the second quarter were better. When you look at Philly, 3rd in the league in rushing attempts, 23rd in passing. And the Eagles, it's ground and pound, and they've been afforded that luxury by some of the schedule advantages that they've had all season long. And honestly, Payne, when I was digging into this game, I knew the Eagles were run heavy, but I was blown away how much run heavier they're able to get in the second half, playing with these leads and pretty much saying, you know what? We're going to dare you to stop us. Jalen Hurts, you're not throwing the football. The only quarterback that threw it less in the second half as a starter this year was Marcus Mariota.
So, there's a million directions we can go here. I don't want to lose my thought on what you were kind of hinting at, because we hinted at it in the NFC Championship game, and it's very much you want to make Jalen Hurts be a thrower from a negative game script, especially late in games. He just hasn't been there, but when he has been there, absolutely horrific. You're talking about like being the 46th out of 47th best quarterback in EPA in a situation where, late in the game he's trailing. Again, it just hasn't happened a lot. You referenced the Eagles' run rate. It's not very high in the first half. They actually pass the ball pretty frequently in the first half, but I think in terms of the run game, we'll probably see more of that from the onset, because that's the largest mismatch in this game. It's the Eagles' run game against the Chiefs' run defense. This is how, the Eagles not just operate efficiently and score in this game, but it's how you limit the amount of times Mahomes can beat you, right? And just like at its very basic core, the Eagles have the most efficient running game in the NFL. Number 1 in schedule-adjusted efficiency. Philly's played an above-average schedule of run defenses, actually. That may surprise some people. 8 games in total against top 10 run defenses. So it's the one element of the Eagles' entire existence this season that's actually been tested. And we know they've prevailed in those tough spots. And, even when the Eagles tell you they're running it, they can still run it. It's big boy stuff. So you look at early downs, first 3 quarters, the Eagles running backs are number 1 in the NFL in EPA per rush. Their EPA per rush in that scenario is 4 times better than the second best running team. And the Chiefs are slightly below average against the run, and they've faced the second easiest schedule of run offenses. Certainly, we've chronicled them and we've discussed them probably the last 2 months or so about the improvements the back half of the season for the Chiefs defense. But when you start to parse out the matchups where the Chiefs faced a top 10 run game and focus solely on that tier of run game, which is closest to what the Eagles present, the Chiefs defense is 21st in EPA per rush allowed, 24th in yards per carry allowed. And you look at some of the other metrics, the Chiefs contact opposing running backs at or behind the line of scrimmage on just 37% of attempts. That's 30th in the NFL. Part of the reason early money was attracted to Miles Sanders over 55.5 rushing yards, and most rushing yards in the game plus 140 or better, and even some nibbles on MVP at 35 and 30-1, is that Sanders averages a shade less than 7 yards per carry when he's not contacted at or behind the line of scrimmage. Once Miles gets going, right, it's good night. And bettors believe Sanders' usage rate increases in a game that's virtually a pick'em, where next week doesn't matter, right? I mean, we're not saving anything. The Eagles have been in so many blowouts, to your point. They smartly don't want their starting running back to deal with all the trauma in the second half when they're leading by 10 plus.
And
it's.
Can I say one?
Go ahead.
I'll say one thing on that too, and I'll give some of the odds makers credit, because I was actually hoping for inflated numbers on the secondary running backs for Philadelphia if they were just going off current form. But I want to use that as a cautionary tale for a lot of our listeners out there who are using recent data points to try and advocate for players like Kenneth Gainwell and Boston Scott to replicate some of the success that they've had in the 2 Eagles playoff games, because the point that you make makes 110% sense, talking about Miles Sanders doesn't need to carry the ball when you're leading by 3+ touchdowns in the middle of the third quarter.
I think the other interesting part, and it's probably smart on the Eagles' part, because right, they're very analytical, they're very sound. It's probably smart to diminish the counting stats as Miles becomes an unrestricted free agent, and you're kind of hindering his agent a touch in negotiation. But
those agents got to have the efficiency numbers at their fingertips, looking at EPA and everything else they want to present to Howie when they're trying to get that cash.
To your point, though, like when games are tight in the second half, Sanders' usage rate remains really high. It's not what we've seen the last few weeks, where Kenneth Gainwell has been highly involved because of the scoreboard. Now, Gainwell is pretty good as a pass catcher out of the backfield. Maybe we see him in that role a little bit more here. But this is interesting to think about, and it just stamps what you just said. The forward-facing analytics and X's and O's guys and the Eagles guys love Gainwell in this game because of what they've seen recently. And maybe it comes to fruition. Maybe it unfolds that way. Maybe Gainwell's been so good you can't keep him out of this game. Maybe his first carry is explosive and, it's like we got to get this guy some touches. But professional bettors have actually hit Gainwell under 22.5 rushing yards. It's why it's now down to 19.5, and it's because they don't believe the game script is going to be anything like the last 3 games with loads of garbage time. And if you look in the second half of games since Week 15 when the Eagles don't have a double-digit lead, Sanders has 32 carries. Gainwell and Scott combined have 5. I personally don't have $0 on Gainwell props, but I think it's worth mentioning the battle there between professional bettors and like the X's and O's and Eagles guys.
Yep.
I think, kind of just getting back to the Chiefs' run defense here, part of their inability to stop the run is scheme driven, right? For all of the Chiefs' defensive improvements as the year went on, it's because Spags threw more guys into coverage and played with lighter boxes. You can't do that here. The Eagles are going to absolutely maul you and kill you if you're playing a light box. And the type of zone read scheme the Eagles run is kind of foreign to the Chiefs. Like, you think about this, yeah, sure, the Titans and Rams tried it, but there was no threat of pass off the zone read with Malik Willis or Bryce Perkins. And, sure, Jalen Hurts isn't 100%, and he did come up a couple times wincing in that 49ers game, something we didn't see against the Giants with 2 weeks off. Hopefully, for the sake of the Eagles, like Hurts' legs will be a factor because you have 2 weeks and maybe the shoulder's a little bit better. But you look since the injury, first half numbers, Hurts' rush attempts have mirrored, roughly 4.5 attempts both pre and post injury. But his yards per rush has dipped nearly 5 yards since the shoulder injury. So Hurts has to be a willing and effective runner here because the Chiefs have allowed 16% more rushing yards than expectation to quarterbacks this season. It's a bottom 10 rate in the NFL. That's got to be part of the Eagles' ground game here. I do think in general, right, like the Eagles should have real success on the ground. They have to. If the Eagles can't run, good night, Irene, Chiefs win by multiple scores. But there's really no logical reason to believe the Chiefs can stop the run. The Chiefs' goal here, I think in my mind, Todd, is to at least somewhat stalemate the Eagles, right? Just win enough of the matchups on early downs to force Jalen Hurts into second and long, third and medium, and then you make Jalen beat you throwing the ball.
Spags can treat this like a flag football game. Let Philadelphia do whatever they want till they get about to the Kansas City 40, then tighten things up, try and change, throw a couple curveballs out there, and do everything they can to confuse Jalen Hurts if he becomes a drop-back passer. But, you mentioned Jalen Hurts coming up wincing and how effective he's got to be as a runner, and I was trying to figure that out. I went back and watched that drive early in the second half against the 49ers where it looked like Philadelphia had already since had that game dead and buried. For Nick Sirianni to lean on Jalen Hurts and allow him to run it multiple times on the drive, I'm not sure if that was proving to himself, to Jalen Hurts, or putting something on tape that Hurts was close to 100%, but I found that one of the bigger curiosities of everything that we saw in the NFC Championship.
Did you notice it, though, when he got up a couple times?
Oh, I did. I noticed it, and the fact that Nick Sirianni still went back and ran the ball with him again in a game where they didn't need him to carry the football just left me scratching my head like, all right, I have to put this on tape for Spags for the Chiefs to believe that Jalen Hurts is a willing and able runner, and if he can do it now, 2 weeks from now, he's going to be 100%.
Yeah, we didn't really see much of the Payne in the Giants game because he had the 2 weeks. So that's a benefit here. You are going to need his legs. You are going to need him to be a little bit of a willing runner because the zone read just doesn't work as well if the quarterback isn't a threat. But there's probably going to be, as I alluded to, more running from the onset here just based upon the Chiefs' defense. I think the other interesting prop, and it wasn't widely available, but Nick Bolton over 9.5 tackles and assists. That's now ballooned out to 9.5 because he's got to be the guy in the middle of this defense absorbing all of those run plays. I do think, again, we're going to see a little bit more of a run-heavy approach compared to what we were clamoring for against San Francisco, right? We kind of talked about the Eagles. I believe it was a 69% throw rate in the first halves of games where you want to attack the 49ers is at least through the air, and Hurts couldn't really hit that game script because he's been a little bit hindered as a passer.
Well, you mentioned Hurts being hindered as a passer provides the perfect segue to talk about what Philadelphia can expect to see from Kansas City's defensive scheme in the secondary. And when you look at Hurts, we know he leads the NFL in passer rating on throws of 25-plus air yards with a rating of 123-plus, second best passer rating targeting wide receivers this season. However, since his shoulder injury, he has been less accurate on those deep throws, just 3 of 10, 30% on throws of 25-plus yards downfield. It's a little bit of a drop-off, albeit on a negligible sample size, but still something to factor into the equation. When you look at Kansas City defensively, they do a number of things. We know about some of the youth and inexperience as far as their secondary, but these are players that have come of age and have answered the bell when been called upon. Clearly, Cincinnati much more prolific throwing the ball downfield, but Philadelphia goes about their business in a different manner. We see Devontae Smith cut into the target share of A.J. Brown. We've seen Philadelphia lean on Dallas Goedert a little bit more that he's healthy. We know he provides a unique element, but when you try and figure out Philadelphia's passing attack against Kansas City, obviously it's easier when Philadelphia very much has the threat of a run should they be playing from a positive game script, but in a negative game script spot, do we have the confidence that Philadelphia can be one-dimensional, throw against Kansas City, and have a little bit of success moving the football through the air?
I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, the reason Shane Steichen is getting interviews for head coaching jobs is really how he's transformed the Eagles' offense. This was, if you remember, one of the offenses that just used a ton of heavy formations with Goddard and Ertz on the field at the same time. It's completely flipped. The Eagles live in 3 wide receiver sets on 76% of snaps now. It's the 3rd highest rate in the league, especially on early downs. Philly encourages you to play with a light box, and they hope you bite. It's how they help Jalen Hurts be successful through the air, candidly, right? And you can see it in the numbers. And the Chiefs haven't been good defending early down passes from 3 wide receiver sets, 2nd worst in the league. The question is, can the Chiefs get Hurts in the right down and distance to make him throw in known passing situations? That's the biggest thing on this side of the ball. Whether it's, creating the aforementioned stalemate a little bit on early downs or a couple times, right, in key spots, or it's Mahomes and Reid creating it on offense by building a lead. The Chiefs have to be able to win enough early downs to have the luxury of being able to stop Philly on late downs. And if that happens, there's a path, right? In the AFC title game, we gave Spags the blueprint, and it worked perfectly, right? High rates of man coverage, force Burrow to get to his 2nd or 3rd read, and hope by then pressure gets home. And it did. This week, if Spags can dial up the perfect defensive formation, it's cover 3 zone, okay? Cover 3 zone allows you to play 7 in the box as well, so you can compete a little bit better against the run. It's likely Snead playing in the slot in that scenario. That's why it was so big. He got cleared from his concussion, which I believe happened about 36 hours ago. Yep. He's a big body, former safety at La Tech, who's a good run-fit guy. Spags has used his highest rate of zone coverage since becoming the Chiefs DC. You want to use as much as that as possible against the Eagles because they haven't faced many zone defenses this season, and you got a guy in A.J. Brown who leads the NFL in yards per route run against press man, okay? Anytime we've broken down the Eagles game late in the season, we've emphasized the defense needs to play more zone. Hurts sack rate increases by more than 5% because you make them think, right? The paint-by-numbers offense that Shane Steichen creates goes out the window a little bit more. Specific to cover 3 zone, Spags can dial up lots of exotic blitz from that on 2nd and long and 3rd and medium if you get them there, right? And sometimes Jalen Hurts' mobility and his athleticism hinders him against the blitz because he always wants to beat blitz with his legs and not his arm. And it's why a really mobile and athletic guy like Hurts is QB 27 out of 40 in passing under pressure. Very small sample as well, but in the playoffs, when the game wasn't in garbage time, so 2 games so far against the Giants and 49ers, Hurts has a negative 0.22 EPA per pass attempt against zone with a 33% success rate. He's averaging just 5.4 yards per attempt. Other reason you have to find ways to make Hurts throw is his inaccuracy rate has soared since the shoulder and sternum injury. his inaccuracy rate has eclipsed 15% in 3 games since the injury. Just 2 balls. I'm going to correct you on that because the Devontae Smith ball was not a catch.
That's a very good point. I should come with an asterisk there. 2 out of 10, not 3 out of 10, because that was very much an incomplete pass.
Yes, he completes 2 balls downfield since the injury. Pre-injury Hurts' completion percentage was nearly 4% better than expectation. It's 3% below expectation since the injury. Now, again, I don't know him specifically. I haven't heard anything internally. But looking at the film, watching the spray charts, maybe the injury hinders Jalen a little more when he throws to the right. I don't know. But if you look at his spray chart since the injury, good God, he doesn't really use the right side of the field. 23 of 77 pass attempts have been to the right side past the line of scrimmage since the injury. 43% of Hurts' passes since the injury are middle left within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage, so lots of short throws. 19 total since the injury have traveled more than 10 yards. And the one area where the Chiefs have been much improved defensively is against the short pass. The Chiefs are top 10 defending throws at or behind the line of scrimmage because of this fundamental shift that Brett Veach used, getting younger and faster on this side of the ball. Now, again, there's a lot of variance to this part of the matchup, right? The Chiefs can have some success defensively, but not unless they can stop the run or build a lead. And if, and only if they can do that, they have to play cover 3 zone and blitz. It's very specific, right? If the Chiefs elect to play press man, it's probably an A.J. Brown game. If Hurts continues to throw left more frequently and the Chiefs decide to stay in 2 high shell, which wouldn't really be smart, but they use it at the league's highest rate, this suddenly becomes a Devontae Smith game because he lines up a little bit more frequently on the left and his target share soars to 29% against 2 high. It also becomes a Dallas Goedert game. Dallas Goedert has had his biggest games of the season abusing 2 high shell. So it is very much going to be predicated on which receivers show out here for the Eagles. If the Chiefs can stop the run, if the Chiefs use the right type of zone coverage, that'll all depend on which pass catcher kind of goes ham here for the Eagles in this game.
One aspect of this Eagles offense that I think impacts obviously both the run and the pass, since you've broken down aspects of the run game that we're going to want to monitor and the pass game as well, is of course that Eagles offensive line, where Lane Johnson and Jason Kelce draw a ton of headlines. But you look at this group ranked only 12th in ESPN's pass block win rate this season, and there are some weak links in that particular group. Jordan Mailata, the one that stands out to me. When you try and figure out Kansas City's defense, and it's a group that, in my opinion, gets undersold week in, week out for how disruptive and dominant Chris Jones can be. The ongoing maturation we've seen from George Karlaftis and Frank Clark, who looks like a shell of himself during the regular season, but dusts off those playoff accolades and raises his game when the stakes increase. How do you see those two groups matching up both in the passing attack and the ground game as far as Philadelphia's offensive line that's garnering all the headlines leading into this football game?
Yeah, the Chiefs have been very good getting pressure this year. But when they don't get pressure, the defense is horrific. So I don't know how you're going to be able to generate that. What we did see Spags do is send some sim stuff with linebackers over the center to kind of allow Chris Jones to get one-on-one matchups. It hasn't happened this year because Kelce has been out of this world fantastic. But in the past, some bigger guys have given him some trouble. I think when you're looking at the Eagles' offensive line, to your point, they have to be elite here. And some of those guys are a little bit dinged up. Lane Johnson re-aggravated the groin, but he's now got 2 weeks. He's got to battle through that. My guy Landon Dickerson dealing with the hyperextended elbow. Is he 100%? So you're not getting the cleanest version of the Eagles' offensive line, and that does need to be an area where you absolutely dominate the Chiefs. Because, again, if you can't get the ground game just humming, it's going to be very difficult to beat the Chiefs. Because the overarching sentiment here is I don't think the Eagles' defense is as good as perceived. And so the Chiefs are going to hang some points here. You have to very much be able to get this ground game going, keep Mahomes off the field a little bit. And if you can't do that at a high rate, or you can't keep Jalen Hurts out of known passing situations, it's going to make it a little bit tougher for the Eagles offense. I just don't know, based upon the metrics, based upon the talent, based upon some of the things that Spags does defensively with light boxes, I don't know if that's in the path for the Chiefs to be able to stop the ground game.
It's so interesting. I've heard a number of people in and around the space, media and otherwise, talk about the way that they feel this game is going to play out, that if there's one team that blew out the other, they think Philadelphia can run away and hide, but don't see a path for Kansas City to win this game by multiple scores. And it just leaves me scratching my head, because if Kansas City is able to stop the run, and we have questions about Philadelphia defensively, there is a path for Kansas City to find some separation as well and really force Philadelphia out of its comfort zone, an area they haven't been in or had to play catch up all that often this season.
Yeah, I think that's, I don't really love getting into conversations like this because there really isn't a path where you're like, the Chiefs defense can stop the Eagles' run offense consistently, right? It's probably not a thing. Now, if it is, right, okay. But to their point, right, if you can get out and have this game script where you're able to use the ground game for its entirety and you are a small favorite in this game, and that would be the expectation, there is a chance where your ground game gets going, you get out to an early lead, all of a sudden the Chiefs are forced to use 3 wide receiver sets and pass on every single down. You can't use your 12 and 13 formations, and Mahomes is hobbling a little bit, and he's not 100% healthy and re-aggravates the ankle, and all of a sudden the pressure is getting home. Like, you can kind of see how that scenario would snowball in the media, thinking that if there were a blowout, it would come in favor of the Eagles. And plus what we just talked about at the top, and that very much dependent on the Chiefs' success is Patrick Mahomes. That doesn't necessarily have to be the path for the Eagles. And I think that's probably an interesting conversation. I'm not betting the MVP at this point, haven't bet it. But I think the delta there in terms of correlation to winning is much wider for the Eagles, right? Like,
yep.
If the Eagles win this game, it could be someone other than Jalen Hurts. The delta is just tiny in terms of the Chiefs. It's probably got to be Patrick Mahomes. And if it's Kelsey, how did he get the damn ball? Right? It's because Mahomes distributed it, right? So that's the interesting component here. And it just plays back to what we discussed at the top. And you can even see it in media row, right? You got like 10, 11 guys doing pressers for the Eagles because they got the more complete team. There's just a couple horses for the Chiefs. And so ultimately, we'll see which unfolds here, the more complete roster or the team with, the highest talented player in the league at the most important position. And that's what makes this matchup so interesting and why there's been a lot of variance and a lot of differing opinions.
I mean, if Damian Williams couldn't win the MVP when they beat the 49ers, wink, wink, nod, nod, then there's no way that anybody not named Patrick Mahomes is going to find a way to...
Well, if you look at when the votes are submitted, they're submitted well before the final touchdown in the final moments salts the game away.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of those are given, right? Like, third quarter.
Media's got to beat the traffic,
quarter,
Payne. Media has to beat the traffic.
Fourth.
You got to get out of that damn building by the end of the third quarter. You don't want to be stuck there unless you're doing post-game pressers.
There's a tabulation too, right? Like 20% of it is fan vote. And so you have to have all the votes in at a certain time. And so they got to be in before, 3 minutes to go in the fourth quarter when Damian's taking and extending the game to a 2-score lead.
Yeah, I don't want to bury your thought process there because I think it's extremely apropos here that if you're looking at Philadelphia, there are multiple paths where other players can go home with an MVP award, but if Kansas City is going to be victorious on Sunday, it would take a event beyond my scope of comprehension for someone other than Patrick Mahomes to be named MVP. So when you look at a lot of the markets, you obviously want to try and extract value wherever you see fit, and it makes an awful lot of sense. And despite what people think, you can bet one side and still bet a player from the other team to win MVP if you feel that is an advantageous number or option. Not necessarily as a hedge, but a very different bettable market that's out there. You, of course, can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Again, most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. Tune in for a lot of the great content that we have going on there. Now, we are not just a football-specific company. We have plenty of content to keep you busy from an investing standpoint throughout the course of the year. And Payne, Speaking of investments, this is the portion of the program where we try and consolidate all the great analysis that you provided our loyal listeners, not just in this show, but what we've done beginning in the dog days of summer when we broke down all these teams from a preseason standpoint, went through the trials and tribulations that is the NFL grind as sports bettors. But where have you found a little bit of wiggle room and opportunity in either the prop market, game market, or any other ancillary opportunities for Sunday's big game?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that still have some value. I mean, we've been out betting props for 10 plus days now. And so a lot of things have gotten to unplayable territory, but I think there's a couple that still present some value, one of which is Patrick Mahomes over 3.5 rush attempts minus $1.60. And, was Mahomes 100% in the AFC Championship game? No, right? But he has another 2 weeks to heal here. The stakes are as high as they get, so there's going to be some more leverage plays. I think Mahomes, with no games moving forward, is going to be a little bit more of a willing runner here. And I referenced that pressure rate the Chiefs' offensive line is allowed in the playoffs. It's 9% higher than the regular season. Mahomes is number one in evading sacks from pressures. He does that with his legs. And you look at just the last 2 games, worst-case situations and scenarios. Mahomes reached 3 rushing attempts against Jacksonville despite being hobbled for 3 quarters and missing multiple possessions. The last game against the Bengals, had 3 in that game 7 days after an injury that was supposed to keep him out 4 weeks. The other element here is kneel downs, right? Possibility of a kneel down before half, possibility of 3 kneel downs in victory formation. So I like Mahomes over 3.5 rush attempts as the first prop. We'll play that out to $1.60. I think ultimately, come game day, this is going to creep past 3.5. There's probably going to be a 4 in front of that number. Other prop that we bet that I like, total first downs combined in the game over 39.5 minus $1.35, playable to 40.5. I think if you've listened to the podcast in its entirety, we believe the Eagles will be able to run the ball here. And despite a shoddy offensive performance and not being pushed by the 49ers at all in the NFC title game, the Eagles had 25 first downs. This is really the first time in a long while the Eagles offense is going to be pushed by another offense on the other side of the ball. And I think we referenced 2 of the games the Eagles played top 10 offenses that had their starting quarterbacks and were in controlled dome environments. It's week 1 in Detroit, week 16 in Dallas. Each game had 50 total first downs. We talked about the Chiefs' willingness to throw short, 9th in rate of throws that travel 1 to 9 yards. That's the Achilles heel of the Eagles' defense, particularly on third down, where they're 26th in conversion rate allowed on those short throws. Another prop that we referenced a little bit that's still out there that is starting to creep away, and there's some numbers that are a little bit higher than this, but I think if we can get to it still here in the next couple of hours, we'll have a shot. We talked about, how you keep the Eagles defensive ends honest, and it likely features Sky Moore and Kadarius Toney in motion on some jet sweeps. You add a Mahomes rush attempt, you go and add a McKinnon or a Pacheco rush attempt. Clyde Edwards-Helaire just was moved to the active roster. He probably gets a series or 2. There's still some 4.5 minus 60 out there, but you got to get to it quick because this will likely be 5 everywhere within the next 12 hours. That's kind of where we're trending. We also talked a little bit about some situations where we see the Chiefs in more 12 and 13 formations where you have Watson, Jody Fortson now healthy, Kelsey. We saw a situation where this kind of is a touch of a hedge if we don't get the Mahomes over rushing attempts because there's a situation where it's 3rd and short or 4th and short, and we've seen Andy Reid go to where he puts the tight end under center. That's a situation here that's in play as well. So it acts as maybe a nice hedge attempt there for the Mahomes over rushing prop if you get jobbed one because Andy elects to put a tight end under center for a sneak. Last and final one that I think still shows some value here, Todd, is Quez Watkins under 1.5 receptions minus $1.50. He's kind of been the odd man out since Dallas Goedert returned from the injury in week 16. We talked about the Chiefs using high rates of too high shell and that being more of a Goddard situation. If you look over the 5-game stretch since Dallas Goedert has been back, 3 total receptions for Quez. You look at his median number of catches when Dallas is involved in these games, it's just a half reception per game. In the biggest moments, the biggest spots, the biggest games, his snap share has decreased. Week 20, Quez was only on the field for 31% of snaps. We think this is going to be more of a running game script for the Eagles than passing as well. Hurts hasn't been as accurate since the injury, especially downfield, which is usually where Quez Watkins does his dirt, right? They take that deep shot or two. If we get more cover 3 zone from the Chiefs, Zach Pascal is a more savvy, find the spot and sit down type of receiver than Quez Watkins is. Teams also just go to their horses in these biggest games, right? Like, you have to go down swinging with your best, not your 4th or 5th best at a singular position, right? Halftime's a little bit longer, more commercials, players are more rested, so you can stick with your horses for a larger snap share. And I think, some of the ancillary players start to get phased out a little bit, and Quez Watkins seems like one of those ancillary players at this point in the season here, Todd. So those are the 4 props that I would gravitate towards that still show some value based upon our numbers and that we have bet thus far. So as always, we go to war with you. One thing I will say, because we've completely borked it and not mentioned it, and I don't even think you knew about it, but probably about 2 weeks ago, we reached 500 episodes.
Nope, had no idea. Had absolutely no idea. They all blend together around here.
They do. So we've eclipsed 500 episodes. We're going to do a $500 500th episode contest on Twitter. So you have to go to the Bet the Board Pod Twitter feed. By the time you're listening to this, that post will be pinned to the Twitter feed. It'll be a Super Bowl 57 contest, $500 cash up for grabs. So I forgot to promote that at the top. Forgot to promote that at the smart spot here at the start of the Best Bet segment. But I forgot and wanted to get it out there. So go to Bet the Board Pod on Twitter. You'll see the pinned post. $500 cash Super Bowl 57 contest at your disposal.
The better question that I have for you after that announcement that you made, can we guarantee that you're good for another 500 episodes of Bet the Board podcast? Can we get you to commit right here and right now to all of our loyal listeners?
I feel like you're more concerned with that than listeners might be. So that was since 2014.
Yeah, so another 9 years of podcast
just
feels
being
realistic.
Just being candid here, I'm going to set the under on that and juice it quite high.
Oh, there we go. There are sponsors cowering right now, trying to figure out if they could lock you into a long-term lifetime contract. Patrick Mahomes, a la sake. But no, it goes without saying, we appreciate everything our listeners have brought to the table. I mean, without them, we wouldn't be reaching these incredible milestones or expanding our content into areas that we never thought possible in the past. Without all of you guys and girls out there, whether you've been with us from day one or you just happen to be listening to Bet the Board for the very first time in anticipation of Super Bowl 57, it goes without saying, the interaction is outstanding. The feedback, the emails, everything that comes along with it, the reviews that you guys provide, it has been a tremendous endeavor and one that we are thrilled to continue down that path as we look towards bigger and better things ahead for football 2023 and beyond.
We've mentioned a lot of numbers on this podcast, matchups, metrics, prop numbers. Here's the most glaring number of all, the most crazy metric there is, and it just proves everything Todd just said. Over 80% of podcasts are done after 8 episodes. So thanks to all the loyal listeners. We do this because you guys continue to listen, and you afford us the luxury of making a few bucks along the way.
No doubt about it. Support the products that we have here, the sports books that have been with us along the way, and a variety of other avenues that we're going to continue to explore going forward. So thanks again, and we say it with the most sincerity and as heartfelt as we can be as we put a bow on another outstanding football season around the Bet the Board home offices. Any final words of wisdom, parting shots, little nuggets, tidbits that you'd like to offer up in terms of what your Super Bowl setup is, things that you like to eat, how you structure your day? I mean, people love to peel back the curtain on what it's like inside the Payne Insider home base and a game of this magnitude with obviously vested interest across the board.
Well, now that we are done with the podcast for NFL season, and maybe we have one throw in there, but just going to relax a little bit. Now it's all about finding some more props, relaxing a little bit, going to go for a run here after the show. In terms of watching environment, it's pretty simple. I watch the game with Pops. We'll have some bad food, wings, pizza, the whole nine, and just hang out and be a normal human.
I can't wait.
Which does not happen all that often.
I can't wait for the text Monday morning when you tell me how all those decisions you made, the wings and the pizza, don't feel quite the same way 24 hours because we're both old as fuck these days.
Here's the best bet ever, by the way, and maybe it's just me, but maybe it's getting old. If I'm going to have a splurge meal, I've started trending more towards wings, started trending more towards your splurge meal there of Popeyes. Chicken does the least amount of damage. When I go full bore pizza, which I'm going to do here, but I know I'm making a deal like with a stoned man for the next 24 hours. Like what carb overload does to me at this age now. I'm just foggy. I feel like I've smoked the best bip known to mankind, and I'm just stuck for like a full day.
Hey, speaking of Popeyes, how about the Philadelphia Eagles having it delivered to the tarmac before their flight out of Philly in anticipation of the Super Bowl? So, pretty impressive there. I'd love to know how many spicy chicken breasts get consumed by members of the Eagles organization when they're making the specialty orders there.
Kelsey you got to probably set the over-under at like 22 and a half breasts there. I have to tell you, it feels like a scary proposition doing that. I mean, all it takes is one Mahomes fan, one Chiefs fan cooking that chicken in the back.
Here we go. Here we go.
We just write JH on the box. Special delivery for the quarterback here.
Are we going tainted Utah pizza parlor, Michael Jordan flu game type stuff here? Is that what you're getting after?
Hey. You're not cheating, you're not trying.
The man wants to be as buttoned up as possible more often than not when it comes to everything that's going to be on the training table for these teams going into the big game. But, hey, appreciate all the hard work, man. I know it goes without saying. I mean, this podcast wouldn't take place without you deep diving the groups that you talk to and the information you're willing to share each and every week. So I know the listeners appreciate it. I appreciate it. And again, want to say thank you to everybody who's tuned in and take advantage of the $500 free roll essentially for the contest. You'll see all of those details circulated on Twitter. So for Payne Insider.
Link will be in the description of the podcast.
Yeah.
Also,
follow the rules,
the other
right?
link that'll be in the description of the podcast will be to our newsletter, which I believe newsletter prop bets are like 16-5 this season. We'll probably have another prop bet for the Super Bowl in the newsletter again. So make sure you subscribe ASAP. That might go out Friday afternoon. It might go out Saturday morning. Shit, it might go out Sunday 90 minutes before kickoff because we've got a nice little nugget that we want to share with you. But sign up for the newsletter as quickly as possible. That link is also atop the podcast description.
You going to do everything you can to crash the website on game day again?
Oof. That was close. This past when was that? Was that
I think it was divisional weekend.
Yeah, my tech guy was like, "What's going on here? Did you guys get?"
We put topless pictures of you on the website. That's what it took.
Pam Anderson sex tape or something because the traffic here is getting a little nutty here.
Topless pics of Payne Insider, just the way everybody wants to go into the offseason.
Listen, you're the guy with the better chest. That is the most unsuspecting chest that west of the Mississippi.
I'm embarrassed,
Mr. Todd Fuhrman.
I jumped on the scale, and I know we've gotten completely off the rails, but we're afforded that luxury because we make the rules around here. Jumped on the scale the other day.
Plus, all the good stuff's already been
Yeah,
absorbed.
exactly. So we can leave with a little bit of levity. I was embarrassed by my overall weigh-in because I like to see where I am when I start the season. You talk about overall health and fitness versus where I end the season, and I know you get angry about this. I was down 9 pounds from where I started this season, so I'm not sure if it's
such a problem.
I'm not sure if it's the stress and everything
we all
else.
Can relate. We can all relate of the problem of losing weight.
Hey, I got to bulk up again. I got to look good in wedding paraphernalia 2 months from now, so I got to clean it up a little bit.
Your problems are so relatable with the rest of the world, Todd.
That's what happens. You get emaciated when you go on the 500 calorie a day diet. This is what you go through. But all right, again, thank you to all of you, our loyal listeners. Best of luck with all your Super Bowl investments, whether it be props, side, total, or squares, whatever you're doing to keep the game interesting. Enjoy your friends and family on a joyous day, the most unofficial official American holiday there is. Super Bowl Sunday, and most importantly, with the myriad of prop bets that Payne offered up come Sunday afternoon into the early evening, we'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.